about 200 years ago, maybe a little bit more, on Mynydd Bach, which is like a long, not very high, well, mountain, the little mountain, but it's like a ridge that straddles North Ceredigion from north to south. And 200 years ago it was a very poor land. It was a common land. It was commonly owned. So no one single person owned that land, the commons. But this was kind of early 1800s, and the king was selling off the land because he was raising money to replace the warships lost in the wars with Bonaparte. And in order to do that, he was selling off land which maybe he did or didn't own, the common lands. But the kind of people who lived on Mynydd Bach had no idea about that. And the people there, they lived in these old stone houses. And David and Jackie, they kind of farmed that land. By which I mean they quarried stone. It's a very stone-ridden area, and each of the houses there had their own little quarry. And they would bring the stone down into Aberystwyth, Abereron, Aberteifi, and they would sell it for road building or for building more houses. And they also dug peat. This was a boggy land, and they cut peat, dried the peat, just like they did in Ireland and many parts of the West. And again, they would sell that in the market towns of Aberystwyth, Aberteifi, so that people could use it to light their fires and keep their damp little cottages warm throughout the winter. It had always been like this. David's parents, their parents before them, had farmed the land in this way, and Jackie's children, when he had them, and their children would do the same. It had always been like that. One day in 1819, a very elegant gentleman, dressed all in silks, by the name of Augustus Brackenbury, arrived on the Mynydd and announced to the people that he had bought the land from the king, and he was about to do what many men had done before him and build a castle, a castell. Well, the people just stared. They were very good at staring, particularly the children and the sheep. Nothing can stare better than a Mynydd Bach sheep. You can try it, there's a few around here. Augustus thought them rude, but in fact, he was speaking in a language that they didn't understand. They were monoglot Welsh speakers. Augustus decided to build himself a house so that he would have time then to design his beautiful castle. The walls were in place and the roof timbers were in place when he woke up one morning to find his house had burned to the ground. And there behind him was young Jackie Ivan, laughing and staring. And Augustus went up to him, grabbed him by the ear and said, "Did you do this, boy?" But of course Jackie just stared because Augustus was speaking in a language he didn't understand. Augustus dragged Jackie to the magistrate and demanded a prosecution. But the magistrate explained that the people of Mynydd Bach couldn't understand how somebody could sell land that didn't belong to anybody. In fact, if anything, they believed that the land owned them, or certainly was on loan to them. So he fined Augustus 2 and 6pence and let Jackie go scot-free. He built another house, roof timbers were in place, and that too burned to the ground. He built a third house, and this time he kept watch. And as twilight fell, he saw, coming down the track from the mountain, along this very track where we're standing now, was a row of flares, each held by a big, strong man. And it wasn't the fact that they were big, strong men that was so frightening. It was the fact that each and every one of them was dressed in a skirt, an apron, a blouse, shawl, mop caps on their heads, one or two of them even with Welsh ladies' hats. Augustus raised his gun and he pointed it at the ringleader, David Ivan Agov. And there was a silence, a pause. You could only hear the bird song and the rustling of the wind. And then Augustus lowered his gun because how ridiculous would it be to shoot a man in a frock? So they burned his house to the ground. Augustus refused to leave, and it was said they had to drag him out, and his coat buttons were like roasted chestnuts. Augustus was furious. He put up posters all around the Minid offering rewards of an enormous sum of money in exchange for information about the ringleaders. But because the posters were in a language that nobody on the Minid could understand, nobody collected the reward. Augustus was apoplectic. This was revel, war. Very few people got prosecuted. Although people got hurt, stones were thrown, people were beaten, horses and carts were overturned and thrown into Llyn, there was anger and pain. It lasted 10 years, from 1819 to 1829, and it was known locally as Rhyfel y Saith Bach, the War of the Little Englishman. But who won the war? Because it wasn't Augustus. In 1829 he left, and it's said he went to London, where he dealt in salt and possibly slaves with the West Indies. But it wasn't the people either, because after 1829 almost half the population of Mynydde Bach left within the next 7 or 8 years, and they took boats, great schooners from Liverpool, having sailed from Aberavon, and they sailed over to Baltimore and Boston. They took wagons over the great endless ridges of the Alleghenies to the Welsh settlement fort of Pittsburgh, where some went down the Ohio River and settled in the flatlands and became farmers. Others went down the Monongahela into the Appalachian Mountains, where they dug for coal in the forested mountains. But maybe it was the land, this land, that won the war. But here we are on Mynydde Bach now, and even on this side of the cattle grid there are barbed wire fences and stone walls, and over there are wind farms placed in the ruins of the old peat cutters' cottages. Cars run to and fro over the cattle grids. But you see, the land did win the war, because in time fences and walls and wind turbines can fall to the ground.